I died inside the day my father could barely make it to the restroom. His heart raced, and he was out of breath walking 12 feet, but he refused the help of a nurse or of a wheelchair. I ran out of the hospital room in tears. He had my adult cousins bring me back in and scolded me. If I was going to cry, he said, then I shouldn't come back to see him. At the time, I thought my father, Birhanemaskel, was angry with me, but as an adult looking back, I realized he didn't want me, his only daughter, to see him helpless and weak. The following Christmas, my best friend and I paid an artist $200 to recreate a wallet-sized picture of my father from his days as a guerrilla fighter in Ethiopia. The artist colored the paintings with intense oranges and reds surrounding my father's dark afro. I'm not sure if it's the colors or my father's threatening stare, but that painting, which sits in our family home on Poplar Street in Denver, radiates a powerful energy. Maybe that's why my father makes it a point to show it to everyone who comes to our house. Even on his last day in Colorado, he pulled out the painting and showed it to friends who came to bid him a final farewell. In many ways, my father was saying goodbye and embarking on the final chapter of his life in Ethiopia. But that day also was the beginning of a search for the man in that painting, an accomplished and respected man, someone with a purpose. For his sake, I pray he finds that man when we finally get to Ethiopia. I'm not sure he can go on otherwise.
Can you keep going? Wow. If you're comfortable. But
Sure.
I'm very
Yeah.
interested in that.
That was the intro for chapter 1. Going home. I was about 10 years old when I dreamed about almost being devoured by lions. My father appeared to rescue me. He was my version of Tarzan, with bulging biceps and handsome locks of jet black, cotton-soft, curly hair. He had always been my hero, a political warrior in Ethiopia, a guerrilla fighter during the communist takeover of the 70s and 80s, and a beloved leader. I'm not sure when that image began to fade, perhaps when I became embarrassed to admit that my father, Birhanemaskel, was a janitor in America. He had been so much more. His mother died when he was about 12, and his father when he was about 20, 1 year before he was to graduate from Bible college in Ethiopia's capital city, Addis Ababa. My dad still regrets never responding to his father's pleas to see him. He wanted to go back to Aksum, in the northern region of Tigray, with a degree in his hand. Instead, he dropped out of Bible college when he got word that his father had died. He stayed in the capital city about 13 years, almost starving to death at first. His only skill was being able to interpret the Bible. He took English classes with missionaries, hustled for food, and eventually opened a grocery store in Dirdawa, northeast of the capital. That's where he was thrown in jail, and his business was confiscated by the communists. The military coup known as the Derg, infamous for its leader, Marxist dictator Mengistu Haile Mariam, killed the king in the early 1970s, then swept through the country, randomly killing and jailing Ethiopians and taking their riches. Scheming for his freedom, my father began to study communist writings sent to him by a man he met in Bible college. The man, Seifu Kabede, had become some sort of political chairman in Dirdawa. My father memorized the writings and regurgitated them throughout the jail, leading government officials to believe that this man surely must have been jailed by mistake. From what they heard, he had to be a communist follower. Within months, he was released from the jail and sent to a communist boot camp, where he eventually was appointed governor of the town he last saw when his father was alive. He left Salaklaha for Bible college and returned suited in the trademark solid khaki uniform. But he swears he never had an allegiance to the government. Never ever, he always said, simultaneously shaking his head and his index finger. My father dropped the diplomatic approach when he learned that the Derg leader had ordered about 60 of his own military officials killed. Less than 4 months into his governorship, he went off into the desert to join the guerrilla fighters. To me, he was Martin Luther King Jr. turned Malcolm X. Thousands of rebel fighters like my father practiced how to seize guns by training with branches. They stole weapons from their enemies to use against them. He quit fighting in 1977 when part of the struggle became Eritrea's separation from Ethiopia, which became official in 1993. My father said he wouldn't shed blood for a division he didn't support. With Eritreans and Ethiopians fighting side by side to oust the dictator, his political stance was unpopular and dangerous. Killing him was easier than risking a new faction. So my father escaped to the neighboring Sudan, where he met my mother. She worked as a cook and a maid at a police station in a refugee camp. With a 20-year age difference, they were never in love. My father felt sorry for her situation, and she needed financial stability. She remembers being at the dinner table in Sudan when police would bust in the door and haul my father off to prison. He was a troublemaker, she would say. When the Sudanese government tried to retrain Ethiopian children and make them write backwards from right to left, he protested and started his own school. When famished skeleton refugees poured over the Sudanese border during the Red Terror, my father helped create an Ethiopian refugee camp and a process for women to travel safely without fear of being raped or kidnapped. He also continued political work on various boards and committees where brash comments against ideas he didn't support got him jailed 13 times. The last time was supposed to be the last, when he was ambushed by a group of men who had the support of the Sudanese government and was taken to an area where he was to be killed. Word spread of what happened, and hundreds of people gathered to beg the United Nations and Red Cross to step in. The organizations wondered what sort of man he could have been, that so many people were concerned. They intervened and gave him the choice to move to one of 3 European countries or the United States. He chose Colorado because he knew of another man who had come here under similar circumstances. At the time, my brother was 2 and I was only 4 months old. My mother was eager to leave Sudan because of my father's constant problems. Going back to Ethiopia likely meant death. They had no idea what to expect in America, but they had high hopes. Instead, they got a divorce, were met with racism, which stung deeper when it came from African Americans, and a son who was constantly in trouble with the law. My mother later remarried an Ethiopian her own age and had 2 more children. My father became a janitor. He refused to go on food stamps and worked 2 cleaning jobs to buy his first home in Denver.
You alright? Give me a hug. You got a fry.
Get it out.
It's all right. Nothing wrong. He's human.
Of all my life, I never struggled like I did in America. My father would often repeat in Tigrinya, the language of the North. The truth is we all struggled. At school or among friends, I wouldn't elaborate beyond that he worked in a hospital. Even my brother once denied to his friends that the man who came home for lunch in a janitor's suit was our father. My father is a frail man now, in his 60s. Legal documents give conflicting birth dates, and even he can't say for certain which is correct. He treasures the few pictures he has of his former life, handsome pictures where he doesn't smile, but instead has the face of a brave man on a mission. A face that often reappeared in my dreams. The skin below his eyebrows hang, making his eyes appear smaller. He doesn't keep himself up these days, except on Sundays, before he goes to church, when he puts on a clean pair of socks and uses a wet comb to fix his hair. When I look at him, pale-faced, sprawled out on the hospital bed for a monthly checkup, he's hardly the man I used to see in my dreams. At the doctor's mercy, he can barely communicate in English anymore since a mild stroke a few years back. What happened to my father was opposite of the American dream. He fought his entire life, but was beaten to a pulp in America, where he called himself a dummy for never going to English school, and pushed me, his youngest child and only daughter, to be the first to graduate college. Coming to America cost my father his dignity. My brother and I are grown now, and our father is tired and ready to go home. He left with the clothes on his back, and he'll return the same way. He won't go back a successful businessman or a pharmacist like many Ethiopians have done. The American dream was always just out of his reach, but he brought it close enough for us to grasp. And as I prepare for this bittersweet experience of taking him home, I realize I have no reason to be ashamed.
I gotta
Dang! I didn't see all of that. I feel so raw. This was 10 years ago. It's funny, a lot of that too. I mean, it was almost, it's weird to say, it was almost a blessing that my dad got sick because I would have never had the chance to sit and talk. Well, maybe I would have, but it rushed that process of like asking more questions and digging deeper and really understanding who he was. A lot of that stuff he didn't even tell me, like the whole helping women cross the border during the Red Terror. My dad didn't even tell me that. It was someone else who told me that story. And then I'm like, Dad, this is what so-and-so said, And I don't know, it was interesting. It was like I finally saw my dad. I didn't realize I never saw my dad before, It was a really strange interesting experience.